Welcome to our podcast, Never Mind the Chaos. My name is Leonard Simpson, partner with 2020 Financial Advisors, and I'm joined by my co-host, Michael Chastain of Chastain and Jones Law. And it's our pleasure today to have as our guest, Cathy Moran of Moran Law Group. Good morning, Cathy. How are you?
Good morning. I'm eager for the conversation.
Well, we're delighted to have you here. And, one of the things I always like to start off with is learning more about our guest and, your formative years. How you got started. Now, you are a native Californian, I
I'm
believe.
fourth generation Californian.
Wow.
So I literally one side of the Cooper side came on a wagon train through Utah and down the valley, I think, to Southern California. When the Quakers arrived in Whittier, the Chamber of Commerce was there with a box of peaches, and my great grandfather was there with a wagon to take them to the hotel. So we've been here for a long time.
And a long time being where you grew up, where?
I grew up in the Central Valley.
Central Valley. Okay.
My father grew up in Avenel and Kalinga. His dad was in the oil was a worked the oil fields, and my dad was a veterinarian, and we most of my childhood that was important anyway. We lived on a ranch. My dad's vet practice was right across the yard, and so I helped with that. We had lots of livestock, lots lots of unusual experiences living there.
So is his practice primarily with I guess farm animals?
It was mixed. His specialty, his real flair was horses,
Horses.
but we treated large animals of every sort and small animals when we had to, because my dad wasn't particularly smooth with when you treat small animals in a vet practice, you're really dealing with the pet owner, and
Yes.
that takes a whole different set of skills than fixing the animal.
Yeah.
So he liked to do large animals much more than anything else.
So you grew up on a farm.
Grew up on a farm, a couple miles out of town. Was active in 4-H. Won the state championship or the highest prize uh, in my horse project. Um, so that was a big part. It was a small town, enlivened by the fact that the Lemoore Naval Air Station moved into town about the same time we did. So there was a little bit of leavening of the small town by all of these Navy families who had traveled outside of Kings County, which many of the people around us otherwise hadn't.
So I guess you could have taken a direction and followed your father to become a second
He
generation vet.
he was adamant that women didn't belong in vet medicine because he thought that to do large animals well, you had to have a certain amount of strength,
Mhm.
um, and uh, and he was distressed by the number of women in vet school who almost invariably went into small animal practice, and he was worried about the supply of veterinarians for the large animal industry. We saw lots of dairy cattle where we were, um, so I got no encouragement to be a veterinarian.
So that was off the table.
That was off the table. That was off the table.
And so then what? Tell me about tell us about your formative years.
Well,
What was
I
your
was in,
direction? Where did you? Yeah.
I was interested in politics from very early age, and it became, or at least to a high school kid, it seemed that to make change, you either had to hire a lawyer or be a lawyer. So that was kind of a starting position. But I went through university in 3 years, and I was exhausted. And when I got down to write the check to apply to law school, I thought, do I really want to do it $50 worth, which I think was the application fee then. And so I laid out for what turned out to be 5 years and worked on staff for a couple of political campaigns, edited a local newspaper, um, edited some international agricultural reports, just and worked on a television station. Nothing lasted very long, but it became clear to me that as a woman in the early 70s, you needed to have an advanced degree to really have a to be not to be employable in a job that made a difference. And it seemed to me that law school was the field where the advanced degree was broadening rather than narrowing. That if you get an advanced degree in social work, you've pretty narrowly confined the kinds of jobs you can hold. Whereas law looked to me like you could have self-employment was a possibility, um, and then any number of ways to use that degree. So that was kind of the impetus to pick law as opposed to something else.
So
So
you,
Kathy, you went to Stanford, and I understand you got a political science degree, right?
Yep.
And was the goal that you were going to go to law school with that?
Um, no, the goal of the political science degree is that's what animates me.
Okay.
That's that's where my the kind of the public good issues are the ones that seem important to me. And at that point, I was just trying to get through school. I didn't didn't have enough money for it to be comfortable to take 4 years to do it. And so I really buckled down and took lots of classes and loved the Stanford experience. And if I had it to do again, I would do it a little differently. Um, but Stanford was marvelous. Um, but by the time I graduated, I was beat. So did something else, and it became clear that law was really where I wanted to be, and these other things I'd tried um, were interesting. And the political campaigns were very satisfying, but again, those are exhausting, and of course it's episodic.
Right.
You work 20 hours a day, 7 days a week for 3 or 4 months, and then particularly on a losing campaign, then nothing.
Nothing.
Um,
Yeah.
so
Because
so I
it was interesting because I got a poli sci degree too, and felt very limited in what I could actually do with it.
mhm,
I actually went to law school because I couldn't really think of anything else to do. I didn't
uh-huh,
want to be a professor. I wasn't that interested in it,
yeah,
and at that point, politics were um, well, that came after 72 and Nixon and
mhm,
Watergate and all of that, and I was kind of down on that whole idea. So it's interesting how
mhm,
different how it progresses. All right, so you wind up at Hastings up in San Francisco, that law school, yes?
uh-huh,
Okay.
uh,
And did you have an idea of what kind of practice you wanted to engage in, or was the
no,
field wide open?
um, no, I didn't have any particular focus at that. And one of the ironies is that I took no bankruptcy classes, no debtor creditor rights, um, nothing that would have been applicable to what I ended up doing. Um, but I had some very nice offers from big firms in the San Francisco area, and I had horses at the time, and I figured take a job there, and I'd have the money to support the horses and no time to ride.
Mhm.
And that didn't seem that wasn't where I wanted to be. So a classmate and I opened up opened up shop, rented an office in a building in Palo Alto with a number of other sole practitioners um, and I think well, there was one two-man law firm there, and those people were very good to us. And we would take some of the cases that they couldn't or did either had no capacity or no interest, or the client couldn't afford. And our hourly rate at that point was $75 an hour,
Wow.
and things became possible for clients at that rate that weren't
Sure.
otherwise.
So did you open up just a general firm, whatever walked in the
Yeah.
door, you'd figure it out, or did you
Yeah,
have
well,
an area?
mostly civil. I mean, um, I did business. I did a little bit of family law, um, and then we'd probably been there a couple of months when the guy with the office next to ours walked over and said, and he was a bankruptcy specialist, and he said, you know, my best client has this case, and everybody in the area has a conflict because this situation is so has been moldering for so long that nobody who knows anything about bankruptcy
Take it.
could take it. Had they all had conflicts. So he says, if you will take it, I will hold your hand and help you with it. Um, and so we were eager. So we said, sure. And it turned out to be a marvelous fit. His client was the Chapter 7 trustee, and it was just a source of endless business. And it turned out I dearly loved being handed a set of facts. About the same time that I took this case, um, the bankruptcy code the bankruptcy code came in about the same time I was admitted to the bar. So nobody knew anything about the code. And so we were all kind of equally swimming in this new law. And we hung every time we got an appellate decision, you know, we clustered around and tried to figure out how does this really work? And what do the appeals courts say? And how is this gonna go going forward? Um,
And that would have been back in the day where you actually had to read the advance sheets because there was Lexus was just starting, right?
that's right. The most advanced piece of equipment we had when we opened the doors was a self-correcting IBM typewriter. Um, and then maybe the next year, fax machines started becoming common, and you could get online some cases that came at 300 baud, and it was very expensive relative to our practice. Um, so I have just reveled in in the growth of the internet, which makes information, cases, discussion um, easily available. I mean, I
Sure.
can remember the law library in Palo Alto was in the basement of the courthouse, and I can remember, you know, taking a stack of books to a desk and going through and then having to pay 10 cents a copy, 10 cents a page to copy what I thought was relevant. And then you'd have to go get another set of books to shepherdize those cases. And, you know, it was a physical task as well as an intellectual task. And um, I so appreciate the fact that now that all the case law is online and it's affordable, um, and it just makes I mean, it makes me a better lawyer by
Sure.
a long shot.
Yeah,
So,
it's a world. It's certainly a world of difference. I know. Actually, I was probably in Palo Alto at that same time, clerking for a firm, and we had an IBM Word processor that was really a piece of junk. The actual floppies, um, you could put
Word.
like one letter on a floppy. I mean, it was really
Yeah.
archaic.
Well,
But
the
No.
first word processor I saw belonged to the guy who referred the first bankruptcy case to us, and it was an AB Dick, and it had a one line display, and if there was an error that you wanted to go back and correct, you had to backspace and delete everything up to that error, fix it, and then move forward. And so you get a draft of something, and you'd say, "Gee, I could have done that better," or "That needs to be expanded." And we were still producing briefs with carbon paper.
Mhm.
Oh, it was just laborious. And so again, I so love composing anything on the computer where I can move and delete and rethink without having to say, is that change worth the effort to get it on paper?
So,
Okay.
Kathy, let me ask you this question because I always find this fascinating. Do you think that the experience that you had, which I had as well, is you know drafting stuff on a typewriter and really having to ask yourself, is that one mistake worth redoing this whole page? Do you think that that was a benefit as opposed to now literally you can just talk into your computer and print stuff out?
Well, I, in high school, my journalism teacher insisted I learn to compose on the typewriter. And I resisted and I wasn't very good at it. But one of the jobs I had after Stanford was editing a newspaper, and that was a good skill. I think I don't see, well, I think editing what you write is incredibly important, and you can lay out the big idea, but goodness, everything I write is better for aging a day and coming back and looking at the way those sentences go together, and is that idea fully developed? And so uh, I think however you put the first draft on paper, uh, the most important thing is going back and editing it. And it took me a while to figure that writing a brief was really like being the judge's law clerk, in terms of, here's how you can get to the result I want.
Right.
Um, and and so, but again, I'm just wedded to my computer, and which makes cell phones for me of only marginal interest, because I can't no keyboard
Uh,
on a cell phone, and I want to put sentences together.
So Kathy, going back to the earlier days when you had to sit there in the law library with a stack of books
Hmm.
and do that type of research, I mean, do you think that made you better at what you did back then versus the ability and the access, everything being out there online today and chat GPT? I mean, how do you
No,
compare these days to now?
no, because the amount of time it took to schlep the books from here to there, and to track down where that case went subsequently. Um, if your client can only afford so much lawyering, and now I can just compile so much more information. Um, no, I'm a vastly better lawyer with easy access to a huge fund of knowledge. Um, and in bankruptcy, um, there's lots of reported trial court um, decisions, and then there were so many. Um, as we stumbled our way through the new law, everybody, including the judges, was looking kind of right and left to see, has anybody else thought this problem through?
mhm.
And the fact that it's all reported, or that lots of trial court decisions are reported, I think just makes the intellectual world richer in terms of seeing how other people see the problem, um, and how they've solved it or approached it anyway.
So it was only by chance. If you had not decided to open up that office with a fellow graduate.
Yeah.
That case had not walked in to your office.
Who knows what I'd be doing? Who knows? It was just such a good fit, and economically it was marvelous because a Chapter 7 trustee had just an infinite fund of needs and cases, and so and he was also the world's best client in that he had no emotional involvement in the issues that you were working. So you could make a business decision that this might take us somewhere, but the cost of doing so isn't going to benefit the creditors. Um, so that was so our marketing needs were next to none,
Mm.
um, and that was terrific for until we kind of moved out of the trustee world. Well, the big move out of the trustee world came with the U.S. trustee, who made the system more who who hung over the shoulders of Chapter 7 trustees in an unpleasant and complicated way. And then for me, when the law changed in 1994 and the debt limits in 13 went up, all of a sudden there was a reorganization chapter that would help people with mortgages the size of mortgages on the peninsula. And I moved briskly into the Chapter 13 world.
So just to explain that a little bit, so before 94, there was a limit on how much you could how much debt you could relieve through bankruptcy. Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, there's all in Chapter 13. There has always, as far since the code anyway, there's always been a cap on the amount of debt that you can have and be eligible, because 13 kind of constricts the creditor's rights that they would have in a Chapter 11 to vote and to object, and the process is much more complex. Those rights kind of get shoved aside and they're much more limited. So, and the Chapter 13 discharge was more expansive. So I think Congress, only little people get the benefit of this goodie. And it seems to me before before 94, perhaps the limit was $300,000 worth of secured debt. And even in 1994, that excluded lots of homeowners in the peninsula.
Right. Property values were well, and from 94 until at least 2000 during the dot-com boom, property values just went through the roof
That's right.
and have never really come back actually. So,
Yeah,
but
yeah, uh, and we could still homeowners on the peninsula would still benefit by higher debt limits. Right now, I think the debt cap for secured debt is $1,300,000 or $1,400,000. But even that, you have a Ford 150 and a mortgage, and all of a sudden you've got too much debt to file Chapter 13.
right,
Um,
right. I mean, it's hard to find a piece of property in the Bay Area that's under $1 million. So,
yeah, and then the
um,
median in the county I'm in is a little over 2 mil.
right.
Um, anyway, so
So let me ask you this question to kind of start off. You started off your practice with a partner, is that
yeah.
right?
Hmm.
Um, tell us a little bit about how you made that decision. And the reason I asked that question is that, I had a mentor that always said never have a partner. And so I'm always curious, and I never did. But I'm always curious as to, how that worked out and what your thoughts on that are.
Oh, I thought it was marvelous because neither of us knew much of anything
Mm.
about what we were doing. And it was interesting, we'd take a position and then back would come the opposition and we'd think, oh my God, did we miss something? How could we have been so, and we scrambled back and we were right the first time.
Mhm.
But but we kind of held each other's hand and uh, it was terrific. Um, but she went off in another direction, went off to teach at the university, and I soldiered on because I was having a good time and enjoyed.
Did you consider trying to bring on another partner, or was that just not in the cards for you?
Um, Not seriously. It's well, joint decision making is difficult,
Hmm.
um, and I think partnerships are difficult because they're tougher than marriages because you don't have the love to hold them together, and
Right.
so no. But I have had associates almost all the time, um, because you need, first of all, you need somebody to talk to, and you need somebody who practices in the field and is obligated an employee to listen to you brainstorm
Hmm.
and offer whatever they can. So I think the mixing of minds is important, and of course it allows you to pick up the slack or stand in for each other when necessary. But it has always been important to me to have people to bounce ideas off of, which again made the internet marvelous because you know, it used to be, particularly when I was doing work for the Chapter 7 trustee, almost nobody else, even in the bankruptcy world, represented trustees and did the kind of things that I was doing. And so I'd go off to conferences and just be delighted where I could find other people who did the same thing. And for 3 or 4 days, you could rub shoulders with people who were doing the same sort of thing. And of course, now you can do that online, and and the exchange. I think we are all so much better for the exchanges that are available online.
Kathy, how's your practice expanded over the years?
It hasn't much. Really, what has done is gotten um, more sophisticated. Well, the problems that we deal with, and of course, I mean, now uh, we are maybe the oldest bankruptcy lawyers in captivity, um, which which means that I can do or I'm not afraid of the complicated issues, but we're still a two-lawyer practice. Um, but we're kind of wasted on the wage earner case. I mean, those are good to keep a financial fund um, under the practice, but what had, what has changed is the complexity of the situations that we will tackle.
Where do most of your new cases come from?
In terms of how do they find me?
Yeah.
Well, one is the web.
Hmm.
Um, I've been I've had a real presence online since 1998. Um, and then at this point, uh, referrals, other lawyers, uh, other bankruptcy lawyers who say that this one's beyond me. Call Cathy. Um, and that kind of brings up one of the real conundrums for the practice here is that this whole generation of bankruptcy lawyers who lived through the 2005 Bankruptcy Reform Act, necessitated a huge amount of relearning, or uh, or learning something brand new. And by this time, there was a national organization dedicated to consumer bankruptcy lawyers. And so that generation spent a lot of time deliberately learning to be better lawyers. And we're all now gray and retiring. And it's my observation that the people who have come up behind us didn't go through uh, that fire of 2005, and perhaps don't have the same comprehensive view uh, as those of us who are still here, having survived 2005.
I mean, there is definitely some advantage to having context to changes. I mean, in criminal law, for example, California, the whole three strikes era, which occurred, in the early 90s, changed the practice of criminal law in very fundamental ways, and now it's been retracted. But having gone through that, I think made people better lawyers. So
Mm-hmm.
that's interesting. So I wanted to talk to you about something that we talked about before we went live, and that was COVID. So
Oh,
um, as I was saying, in 2019, before COVID hit, our firm, about a third of our practice, a third of our revenue was DUIs. COVID hits, bars shut down, restaurants shut down, and that part of our practice really went away. Um, how did it? And so we had to make some serious adjustments. How did it work out in the bankruptcy world? Because I think originally the thought process was bankruptcy was going to go through the roof. Everybody was going to go bankrupt because
yeah.
the state had
It
closed
just got delayed. That's what's
down.
happening now. Um, well, in terms of COVID, there was enough government money that I think marginal businesses got a lifeline.
Mhm.
And it's only now, as those loans are coming due and there's no fresh money into the system, are we seeing the failures that probably had their genesis in COVID. So things got real slow. Of course, in a Chapter 13 practice, a repayment plan is 3 to 5 years. So we had a backlog. We had a bunch of cases that were ongoing, and so that was some revenue. But the number of new filings was minuscule, and if it hadn't been for the Chapter 13 practice, um, we probably wouldn't have survived either. Um,
So was it the PPP? I mean, they called them loans, but they were really just grants.
yeah.
Is that what kind of supported or
Oh, yes.
alleviated the necessity for bankruptcy for many firms?
Absolutely. Landlords got more flexible because there was no point in evicting a tenant if you couldn't replace them. And then the EIDL loans, um, which are expected to be repaid, um, pumped huge amounts of money into the people I see didn't get huge amounts, not like the kind of eye-popping headlines you see about some outfits. Um, but it sustained people who were going through difficulties. And what we're seeing now is those loans coming due, and I think the retail world has changed, and um, what might have been a viable business in the world of 2019, it's not the same economic world in 2025.
Right. Brick and mortar is much more challenging. Here in Santa Fe, we actually only have one brick and mortar bookstore.
Yeah.
There's
Well,
a Barnes and
we
Noble, and that's it.
and we hardly do better on the peninsula. Um, Amazon, and you just think about how ubiquitous Amazon is, and there's little incentive. The one good thing that came out of COVID is that the federal judiciary learned that we could appear by Zoom, and the law practice went on pretty much the way it needed to. Now, we miss when you think about the amount of business we used to do in the hallways with other lawyers, and the amount of elbow rubbing and connection building and all, we miss that. Um, but all of a sudden, or maybe dragged reluctantly into this century, uh, the our bankruptcy courts here have adopted hearings by telephone, by Zoom, and and I've even done an evidentiary um, hearing by Zoom. And the judge was accommodating. We had a couple of glitches. Nobody got distressed. We worked it out. So uh, um, the need to travel, I think, what I'm trying to think how many, what was the last time I was live in a courtroom? I had a federal district judge who insisted during COVID that we show up, and and I've been in a courtroom once or twice since then, and um, other than that, it's the computer, it's Zoom, and so I can deliver services. I don't have to build in the 3.5 hours to the trip to San Francisco for a hearing, where I might utter 3 or 4 sentences. You know, if I've done my job well, uh, the price per word is pretty astounding, but the travel time is is huge. And of course, my clientele doesn't have money.
Right.
Um, so I am just delighted by the fact uh, that I can do a court hearing in a quarter of an hour or 45 minutes, and not have to bill the client
Right.
for the
When it used to take all day, with
yeah,
travel and everything.
yeah,
Yeah. The downside to that, and I agree. I mean, I actually have maybe my last court appearance in San Luis Obispo, which I'll be doing by Zoom on Monday. But uh, so I don't have to travel from New Mexico
yeah,
to do that. But the downside of it, in my view, is that the newer lawyers don't get to see the experienced lawyers in action. And
yeah.
I know when I was, coming up through the ranks, I learned a lot by just watching other
Hmm.
people do their thing.
Hmm.
And I think
Well,
that's unfortunate.
and at least you can um, you can log into Zoom on almost any hearing. The other thing that's happening right now is that bankruptcy is just beginning to pick up some, and just maybe in the last 6 months is picking up steam. So the calendars are thin.
Mm.
So even if you were sitting in the courtroom, and if the judge was in the courtroom, there's not the depth of cases. During 2008 and nine, I can remember sitting in a courtroom and watching 100 or 120 relief from stay cases where people's homes were at risk, and there was just it was several hours to dig through that many cases. So you'd see a lot, and
Right.
you'd get the chance to see who did well and who didn't, and what the court wanted. And now the calendars are so much shorter that even if you thought that was a way to learn something, the calendars are thinner.
Right.
So, you said you have a long time associate with you.
Yeah,
Would that person be able to step in?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I'm trying to scale back my practice, and I'd like to do more writing and maybe more teaching, because I think again we're at a point where we need to make a concerted effort to educate the next generation of bankruptcy lawyers.
And I was just going to ask you that, your thoughts about teaching.
Well, I think I alluded that when we saw the crash in 2008, bunches of lawyers are cut loose from big firms or medium-sized firms, and they say, bankruptcy, that's simple. I can do that. There are official forms. It's just filling out forms. And they flooded the practice, and there was a big demand for bankruptcy lawyers, but but these people knew just enough to get into real trouble. And the trouble was their clients were the ones who were in trouble, and that's what offended me. So I undertook. I created a business, a brand to try and convey to new bankruptcy lawyers what I knew that you couldn't read in a book. You know what my thing is kind of the the art of the practice.
Mhm.
How do you apply the law that you can read anywhere to the real life people who are sitting across the desk from you? So I did. I mean, the first thing I did was 10 or 12 10-minute segments on, kind of an introduction to representing a client in chapter 7. And then I did one on chapter 13, and then I started doing programs, some live and some online. Um, Community property issues in bankruptcy. Community property is one of my particular interests. So,
So
um,
Kathy, how would a lawyer who would be interested in seeing those access those? Is there a website that they can go to, or?
well, the actual programs I think are probably not accessible anymore. But I there was a companion website, bankruptcymastery.com, and that's what was the blog that kind of went with the same theme of here are little discrete issues and what you got to think about, and what do you have to know? What do you have to get from your client? What's it? How to do an initial interview? I mean, one of the things I seem to say repeatedly, things that yank my chain, um, is the free consult, which so often seems nothing more than a marketing tool, and yet every consumer out there expects to get a free bite of the apple. And I think that the initial consult with a client is the most important work I do, and it's the hardest. And so,
Why is that?
because you to make any decision, first of all, you're going to create expectations about what from in the client. What can this do? You need to get enough information to know whether what the choice of chapter is, or is bankruptcy going to create more problems than it solves? Um, and you have to get a sense of, is the client forthcoming? Are they frightened? Are they deceitful, or do they have something they don't really want you to know?
Mhm.
Um, and because you've got all these different financial issues that interact in different ways depending on, do you want to keep the house? Can you afford the car? What's the interest rate? Just
Well, you also have to deal with fear and shame and
exactly, exactly.
all of those emotions that people go through when I mean, I guess you're going to be blunt. Bankruptcy feels like failure, right?
Yes,
And
yes,
so to deal with all of that.
that's right. And you have to build some confidence in them that that you're um, that you're trustworthy, and that they can tell you the ugly things that they really don't want anyone to know,
Right.
including sometimes their spouse. Anyway, I just think that you're stepping into the middle of somebody's financial life, and you're going to guide them in making big decisions. And you're going to test. You want to test in them, what do they really want? If they got to write the script, how would this end up? Where do they want to be? And then let's work backwards and see, can we get there?
Right.
Anyway, so um,
Well, that
that's
and that kind of comes back to, my point about, lawyers now in isolation. I mean, one of as you say, the internet makes so much information available to you, but it also isolates lawyers. and they don't necessarily get to see you in action doing an
Yeah.
intake. They don't get to see
Yeah.
other people doing it because you know your style may be different than what they're comfortable with. They got to find their own,
Yeah.
you know,
But at
way.
least as a teacher, you can provoke this conversation about what do you what do you have to know about the client to be effective in doing this,
Right.
and both for the I am offended by the thought or by the willingness of our profession to give away their time,
Mhm.
and also by the sense that they create expectations in the client that are then disappointed when you really get enough facts to realize that they don't pass the means test or they can pass it. Whatever the
Right.
gating issue is, it takes a whole lot of information to get your arms around that, and I think bankruptcy lawyers are woefully good ones are woefully underpaid in the consumer world. The Chapter 11 lawyers may nobody challenges either the amount of time or the billing rate, and yet the court is at least nominally so busy making sure we don't exploit our consumer clients that they're reluctant to pay for good work.
Mhm.
And so that's another crusade that I'm on among lawyers is um, bill your time, move away from the flat fee. And if you're going to take on complicated things, you can't do it um, profitably on a flat fee because the law of averages doesn't work on numbers as small as our practices. Yeah,
Right. Right. Yeah,
But, but
that was the key for DUIs, for example. The reason we could do a flat fee is because we did large numbers, and
yeah,
so it averaged out. But if we're only handling a couple a month, yeah, flat fees became very problematic because one case could really send you into a tailspin.
yeah, yeah. So I have been a real vocal advocate of keeping time and asking the court for additional fees and and lobbying against judges thinking that we ought to be able to put a fixed price on 5 years worth of work in that first meeting.
Right.
yeah,
So
that could be harmful to the client.
yeah, the lawyer is then put in the between a rock and a hard spot. This problem needs more time than I'm going to get paid for. So do I provide this service out of my pocket? And if it's a big problem, yeah, it can consume a small practice. And most consumer bankruptcy lawyers are work in small, particularly the good ones, work in small practices where you don't have a great volume to underwrite the dollar numbers.
So, Kathy, for your next chapter, any thoughts about teaching as an adjunct professor at a university?
No, I don't think at this point at my age that I'm going to do that. But I'm certainly looking that there's discussions about with a nationally known Chapter 13 trustee about doing some sort of online education for beginning bankruptcy lawyers. So I think we're going to revisit what I did in 2008, updated, and um, and I want to continue writing both for bankruptcy lawyers and for the consumer public, um, because there is so much misinformation about bankruptcy out there, and you get people who are making all kinds of decisions based on what their cousin's in-law's friend experienced 15 years ago, um, in a different state. Uh, you know, so that I think I want to focus more generally on educating, on sharing what I know and how I approach cases with a broader group of people and fewer hands-on cases. I'll brainstorm with my partner, but I'd like to broaden my focus at this point.
Well, there's no question that will have a significant impact on,
Well, I hope so.
the industry,
I hope so.
your ability to impart your years of wisdom and knowledge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, so, uh, Cathy, if somebody wanted to get a hold of you and say, hey, I'm just uh, starting a bankruptcy practice and I need some guidance, what would be the best way for them to reach out to you?
Email Cathy Moran ESQ at gmail.com. That's CathyMoranesq at Gmail.
That'd be great.
And I love mentoring, and I think it's important, and I think it's the most important thing I can do with my fund of knowledge at this point in my life.
Mhm.
That,
Yeah.
that's an outstanding quality. Thanks so much, Kathy. It's been a real
Thank you.
pleasure. Thank
This
you
has
so
been
much.
fun.
Well, you have a great week.
You too.
All
All
right.
right.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Cathy.
Mhm.